Imagine sitting down at a family-style wooden table at Cafe Kusanya in Chicago's Englewood community. As you sip a cup of coffee, you're greeted by my colleague, Erica Dudley, who has a warm smile and a generous laugh. She intentionally welcomes each participant to Poetry in Public, Coffee with Langston, a collective experience of reading and discussing a single poem for a single hour. Suddenly, you find yourself open to communicating with those around you on topics that are generally hard to discuss with strangers. You begin to feel connected to those around the table and filled with a spirit of generosity. For the past 7 years, I've attended Coffee with Langston and witnessed how Erica Dudley has thoughtfully, intentionally, and persistently built a sense of community around the cafe table. She describes her work as a labor of love. She has honed her craft over decades and therefore makes this work look easy. However, creating a sense of community across lines of difference is not easy, and the goodwill produced is not inevitable. How does Erica Dudley create this sense of community? I propose that Erica Dudley is an expert community alchemist who understands how to generate something I call civic trust. Erica Dudley and I work for the University of Chicago's Office of Civic Engagement, and over the last 15 years, she has taught me how to think about generating civic trust, even with people who are distrustful of the University of Chicago itself. In this talk, I'd like to explain the concept of civic trust and the role of a community alchemist. What is civic trust? Civic trust is that invisible yet palpable energy that is the product of something being co-created. This could be a physical project, such as a public mural, or it could be a dynamic conversation about a poem. Civic trust is, by its nature, ephemeral. It exists for a particular period of time among a particular group of people. Not only can it naturally dissipate, but it can also be quickly destroyed. Civic trust cannot be bought or forced and cannot be owned by a single individual. Civic trust cannot be printed to keep in a bank. It only has value in use, and if you don't use it, you lose it. Civic trust may feel elusive, yet I argue it is a potent form of currency, and it is an essential ingredient for connecting people across lines of difference. The currency that civic trust should bring to mind is that of a network of electric currents moving between multiple conduits. Such a current cannot exist without the energy that exists in the world, such as people's talents, skills, and purposes. But this energy remains formless and undirected without the conduits connecting one point to another. Civic trust doesn't just happen automatically. It is usually cultivated and sustained by someone I like to call a community alchemist. A community alchemist is someone who holds a group of people together in a space until civic trust can be generated. A community alchemist is like an electrician who sets up the conduits, making the energy that already exists in the world more useful, directed, and powerful, while leaving open myriad possibilities for what that power might be used for by end users. The outcomes related to civic trust are uncertain and open-ended, but the possibilities are many. The possibilities are made more numerous and more powerful by community alchemists who gather unusual combinations of people, connect those people to one another, and cultivate a space for the relations that produce civic trust. When you think of an alchemist, you might picture a person in a lab coat carefully adding chemicals to a glass container over a Bunsen burner until some magical vapor arises and a new concoction is produced. Similarly, a community alchemist carefully combines a group of people, the ingredients, in a given project, the container, with warmth, like a Bunsen burner, to produce a sense of community and a collective energy. When this alchemy is successful, the bonds among the people have connected in such a way that if the community alchemist exits, the Civic Trust remains. Community alchemists are abundant in block clubs, churches, and local school councils, and they have discovered the formula to establish and sustain trusting relationships with their neighbors. How to build civic trust? There are 4 important things community alchemists do to build civic trust. First, they act as catalysts by inviting disparate people, each of whom trusts the community alchemist, to form a group. Second, they value each person's well-being, in addition to any functional benefit that person brings to the group. Third, they create an intentional space with warmth, bound by norms where the group can gather and engage. Fourth, they balance the need to focus on the purpose of the meeting, the project, or the educational journey, while not being overly prescriptive for the outcomes of the group. One of the best community alchemists I have worked with was a parent volunteer named Norma Lopez. I met Norma while running an after-school theater program. In order to be successful, we needed to find someone who could help us recruit students. Norma, the mother of one of the students, had spent the necessary time and energy to build relationships with the principal, teachers, parents, and students. While she was not a full-time employee of the school, she knew everyone, and everyone trusted her. Thus, when she vouched for the after-school program, we were able to recruit and retain students. Norma generated civic trust by speaking with the parents in English and Spanish, with reminders to bring costumes for the dress rehearsal. The theater was able to pay her a small stipend, but her essential role was not fully recognized or compensated adequately. Civic trust is essential to the health of our communities and to sustaining a functioning democracy where disparate groups of people work together. The work of a community alchemist is often under-recognized or undercompensated. I argue that we should rethink how we value community alchemists precisely because they have the capacity to generate civic trust. Civic distrust. We, as citizens, are fascinated by individuals who break civic trust. Because of our fascination, our news media tells us more stories about those people who break trust. These stories of corruption, greed, and graft add up until we feel an overwhelming sense of civic distrust. Civic distrust is the collective malaise that sets in when citizens doubt the intent, competency, and efficacy of those serving in civic institutions. I argue that we, as citizens, must shift our attention away from the details of individual bad actors and toward the spaces, people, and activities that have a proven track record of building civic trust. The forces that break civic trust will remain constant. Focusing too narrowly on what breaks trust will not lead to an increase in civic trust, and ironically might make it even more difficult for people to believe it is possible to build trust. A personal experience as a community alchemist. In 2012, at a local park steps from my home, there was an act of community violence. I was shaken by this act and wanted to do something to build civic trust on my own block. With guidance from muralist Rafael Lopez, and with a small and mighty team of volunteers, we were able to mobilize over 200 neighbors of differing ages, races, genders, and geography to paint a beautiful 150-foot mural. One might ask, isn't this just an example of good leadership? While I agree that community alchemy can be part of good leadership, what is distinctive is that the civic trust itself lasts even when the community alchemist steps aside. When a single leader anchors a project, often when she walks away, the project falters. In this example, just the opposite happened. I moved out of the neighborhood, but the abundance of civic trust generated from the creation of the mural enabled the community to paint a second mural, create a community garden adjacent to the mural, advocate to fix a dangerous intersection, and eventually establish a neighborhood association. It was this experience that convinced me that civic trust has lasting power. Have you ever felt the magic of being in a group of people who share a sense of civic trust? I feel lucky to get to work with so many community alchemists, many of whom are featured in this lecture series, including Angela Herlock, Jeff Deutsch, Carmen Vergara, and Nick Shields. I hope that this talk and the Voices in Action lecture series will help us value and make more visible the role of community alchemists and the hard work of generating civic trust.